On a warm Thursday afternoon, when the mercury read about 75 DEF and the chatter in Jefferson High's cafeteria was as constant as a ticking clock, Charlotte Hayes walked in with a quiet determination that belied the storm brewing inside her. At 16, she was a thoughtful and gentle girl who had long endured the sting of unspoken injustices and overt racial discrimination in a school where popularity reigned supreme. Living with her hard-working mother and devoted older brother in a modest apartment just outside Tucson, Arizona, Charlotte's life was a constant battle against a society that too often judged by skin color rather than character. That day, while most seats were claimed by boisterous athletes or flashy influencers, Charlotte's eyes fell upon a half-empty table dominated by a boldly placed backpack belonging to Bryce Callahan, a tall and self-assured senior known for his cruel behavior and haughty remarks that cut deeper when aimed at those who looked different. With calm resolve, Charlotte approached and politely asked if she might have a seat, kindly requesting that Bryce move his backpack. Bryce's initial nonchalance turned into a sneer as he glanced at his entourage, who laughed in unison like a chorus of disdain. "This isn't your table," he declared, in a tone laced with contempt and racial superiority, his voice echoing across the room like an unwelcome challenge. "You think you deserve to sit here just because you show up on time." His words, drenched in arrogance, highlighted a history of bullying that extended beyond petty high school pranks. This was about power, privilege, and an ingrained prejudice that had made him untouchable in the eyes of many. Charlotte remained seated, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength born from years of survival training and painful experience. That singular act of defiance was not merely a physical maneuver. It was an emphatic statement of retribution against a system of cruelty and prejudice. In that heartbeat, Charlotte transformed from the quiet girl everyone underestimated into a powerful symbol of resistance. A woman who would no longer allow her dignity to be trampled by racist arrogance. The atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted as onlookers, both friends and former detractors, found themselves struck by the magnitude of her quiet yet thunderous revenge. In witnessing that breathtaking moment of accountability, even those who once ridiculed her could not help but feel a deep empathy and respect for the young woman who turned injustice into a stirring act of triumph. As soon as his body twisted and his balance faltered, Bryce Callahan was sent sprawling across the linoleum floor of Jefferson High's bustling cafeteria. In that split second, everything slowed down for Charlotte Hayes, the quiet young woman who had endured years of being underestimated and marginalized in a school that thrived on superficial cliques and unspoken prejudices. The shift in momentum was as sudden as it was dramatic. Bryce, with his perfectly coiffed blonde buzzcut and haughty demeanor, lost control while his arms flailed in awkward protest. The sound of his body hitting the hard floor reverberated through the room, shattering the uneasy silence that had settled. In that charged atmosphere of disbelief and murmuring whispers, Charlotte stood serenely by the table where the drama had unfolded. Today she had no choice but to meet the vile arrogance embodied in Bryce with the calm precision honed by endless hours of Krav Maga training. Even as Bryce scrambled to regain his composure, his face flushing a deep red that spoke of both humiliation and simmering anger, it was clear that he had not anticipated the outcome of his own aggression. His friends, once confident in their leader's supremacy, now hovered around uncertainly, their expressions a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration for the extraordinary calmness with which Charlotte had handled herself. The stunned silence was soon broken by the nervous buzz of phone cameras. A few students dared to laugh softly or whisper incredulously, while others simply stared, lost in a moment that felt almost too surreal to be true. Bryce's sneer, so often a symbol of his cruelty and unyielding confidence, had vanished in the face of defeat. Instead, his eyes burned with indignation as he tried in vain to conjure a retort. But even as he forcefully pushed himself up off the cold floor, it was abundantly clear that his authority had crumbled in that single, swift moment. The cafeteria, usually a noisy battleground for status and popularity, transformed into a silent, expectant theater where every student was a witness to a reckoning that went far beyond a mere scuffle over a seat. Before anyone could fully process what had transpired, the stern, measured footsteps of Assistant Principal Mr. Jennings resounded down the corridor. As Charlotte gingerly picked up her well-worn book, a copy of a classic novel filled with lessons of resilience and hope, and slotted it into her bag, her eyes never left Bryce's, who avoided hers like a guilty secret. The assistant principal's presence did little to quell the anxious energy in the air. If anything, his arrival heightened the tension as students realized that what had begun as a mere altercation was rapidly evolving into a full-blown investigation. Inside the cool, fluorescent-lit confines of the front office, where glass walls afforded a complete view of the front desk, the nurses' station, and rows of chairs typically reserved for troubled students, the atmosphere was thick with silent judgment. Bryce, still seething with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, quickly glanced away when Charlotte entered the room. Mrs. Valdez, the receptionist, signaled Charlotte to take a seat on the far side of the room, a silent yet pointed reminder of the gulf that separated the aggressor from the victim in the eyes of the institution. The tension was palpable as the door to Mr. Jennings' office finally opened, beckoning both students into a space that was meant to restore order, but instead magnified every nuance of the conflict. They sat in chairs placed directly across from one another, barely an arm's length apart, as if the physical closeness was meant to force an uncomfortable confrontation where unspoken truths would be laid bare. Mr. Jennings listened to both sides with a furrowed brow, clearly unprepared for such candor from a student he had long underestimated. "You're not hurt, are you?" he asked Bryce, who merely mumbled his consent even as his pride was deeply wounded. Turning to Charlotte, he pressed on. "And you're saying you didn't escalate the situation?" Charlotte's reply was curt and sincere. "I only wanted a seat." The room, filled with unspoken judgment and the low hum of photocopies in the background, seemed to hold its breath as Mr. Jennings scribbled notes on his legal pad. His next words carried a warning that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. "Both of your parents will be notified, and you will be kept apart for the rest of the day. While there won't be any suspension today, this incident will be reviewed closely through the footage and reports." Bryce's groan of protest was nearly inaudible against the backdrop of shifting realities, but Charlotte, ever silent, nodded once without blinking, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and resolve. After the meeting, as Bryce was escorted away, his bravado shattered and his pride in tatters, Charlotte remained outside the office, waiting for her next words. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with messages of concern, and her heart clenched at the familiar cadence of worry. Her mother, Camille Hayes, had been called immediately from her long shift at the local hospital, where she had dedicated countless hours to caring for others at the expense of her own well-being. Despite being in the middle of a hectic night shift, Camille had rushed out, determined to be by her daughter's side. When they finally met in the cool, quiet confines of the school parking lot, Camille's face was a study in controlled concern. She did not yell, nor did she scold. Instead, she offered a measured look, filled with both pride and pain. "I'm proud of you, Charlotte," she said softly, as they sat in the car, the hum of the engine and the distant murmur of late afternoon traffic forming a gentle background. "You stood up for yourself without losing control, even when the world was against you." It was a bittersweet moment, one that acknowledged the necessity of self-defense in a system that often preferred silence over confrontation, yet lamented the fact that such measures were necessary at all. As the day wore on, the weight of public opinion continued to build. Among the many observers was Renee, a close friend of Charlotte's who had not witnessed the incident firsthand, but had since viewed the viral video countless times. Approaching Charlotte near the vending machines during last period, Renee's tone was laced with both awe and a touch of sardonic humor as she remarked, "Monroe, you really flipped that man, didn't you? It was like watching a scene straight out of a movie." Charlotte, unwavering in her composure, offered only a small smile and a quiet correction. "I didn't flip him. I moved so he fell. That's all there is to it." Her words, understated as they were, carried the immense burden of all the nights spent in training, all the moments of anguish after countless episodes of racial slurs and dismissals, and all the determination to simply survive in a world that never stopped trying to belittle her. In that moment, the tension was palpable. The remnants of Bryce's infamous bravado were still evident in his absence that morning, and rumors had swirled that he had declared himself unsafe, a claim that, given his usual dominance, was as absurd as it was ironic. As the day turned to evening, Charlotte found a quiet moment alone in the empty hallway near the library, a place where, in the days that followed, the administration at Jefferson High found itself on the defensive. Mr. Jennings, who had initially been seen as a mediator, was now forced to confront a growing chorus of dissent from both parents and students, demanding accountability and change. Meetings were scheduled, discussions were held, and for the first time in years, voices that had long been silenced by fear and complacency began to speak out. The narrative was clear. Bryce Callahan's repeated displays of cruelty, his habitual use of aggression masked as bravado, could no longer be tolerated. Yet, amidst the swirl of opinions and heated discussions, Charlotte maintained her characteristic calm. Though burdened by the weight of the incident and the unrelenting scrutiny that followed, she continued to carry herself with an inner strength that belied the years of pain and isolation that had preceded this moment of illumination. One afternoon, as warm sunlight filtered through the large windows of the school auditorium during a hastily convened assembly, Charlotte found herself facing the entire student body. In an unexpected twist, the principal had arranged for a forum to address the broader issues of bullying and racial discrimination, a forum that many hoped would pave the way for lasting change. On stage, amid the hushed whispers and expectant stares, Charlotte was invited to share her side of the story. In that moment, her heart pounded with a mixture of nervousness and quiet conviction. Speaking slowly and deliberately, she recounted the events of that fateful day, her calm request for respect, Bryce's aggressive refusal, and ultimately her measured self-defense that had undone the bully without resorting to unnecessary violence. Her words, laden with the wisdom of lived experience and tempered by a quiet dignity, resonated with a roomful of individuals who, at that moment, truly understood the cost of silence in the face of cruelty. "I never wanted to fight," she said softly, "but I would never allow someone to trample on my dignity. I've spent my whole life learning that silence does not equal weakness. Sometimes you must stand up, not out of anger, but out of a need to be treated with respect." The room erupted in applause, a heartfelt acknowledgement of the courage it took to reclaim one's own worth in a system steeped in bias. Word of his promise spread quickly through the grapevine, reaching Charlotte and those who had come to admire her resilient spirit. For Charlotte, however, the only true satisfaction lay in the truth of what had transpired, her measured response to a man who had spent far too long wielding his power like a weapon. Deep down, she knew that the path to real change would not be paved by personal vendettas or explosive acts of retribution, no matter how spectacular they might be. Instead, it would be through the quiet, relentless assertion of one's dignity and the courageous willingness to expose injustice for what it truly was. And yet, the magnitude of the betrayal she had suffered, the casual cruelty, the racist undertones in every sneer, the institutional failure to protect a vulnerable soul, ignited within her a determination to ensure that no one else would endure the same fate. In the days that followed, as the school year trudged on with a newfound undercurrent of unrest, Charlotte began to quietly organize meetings with like-minded students and supportive faculty members. These gatherings, held in hushed corners of the library and behind closed doors in the counselor's office, were not merely about healing, they were about forging a new path forward. Together, they spoke candidly about the experiences that had long been dismissed or ignored, the subtle digs, the offhand remarks about skin color, the way certain groups were routinely marginalized. It wasn't long before these small meetings sparked a larger movement, a student-led initiative that aimed to bring the issues of bullying, racism, and abuse of power out of the shadows and into the light of public discourse. And at the helm of this burgeoning movement was Charlotte, whose unwavering resolve and quiet strength had transformed her from a solitary figure on a cold cafeteria floor into a beacon of hope for countless others. As the weeks turned into months, the movement began to take on a life of its own. Local community leaders, inspired by the courage of these young voices, began to attend school board meetings and call for reforms that would better protect students from the kind of injustice that had defined so many of their lives. Veteran educators, many of whom had long battled their own demons in a system resistant to change, lent their support, offering guidance and solidarity to the students who were fighting for a safer, more inclusive environment. The media, always hungry for stories of resilience and transformation, soon embraced the narrative of the quiet girl who had defied a tyrant with nothing but her dignity and well-honed self-defense skills. In interviews and opinion pieces, Charlotte's name became synonymous with a call for justice, a call that resonated deeply with those who had once felt powerless in the face of institutional cruelty. As the school year advanced, so too did the stakes of the unfolding drama. The administration, now caught between the mounting demands for accountability and the ever-present pressure of public opinion, began to take bolder steps. Policies were revised. Training on anti-bullying and cultural sensitivity was made mandatory for staff, and new programs were introduced to support students who had long been marginalized. Yet, amidst these commendable changes, there remained a lingering question. Would Bryce Callahan ever truly learn the lessons that his own cruelty had forced upon him? For Charlotte, the answer was clear. The events of that fateful day had not been an isolated incident, but rather a turning point. A catalyst for an awakening that would ripple far beyond the walls of Jefferson High. For Charlotte, the journey was far from over. The memory of that day, the gasps, the whispered astonishment, the sight of Bryce's crumpled form on the cafeteria floor would forever be a part of her history. But with every step she took in the days that followed, she carried not just the scars of past injustices, but also the promise of a future where her dignity would be recognized and celebrated. In quiet moments at home, while her mother prepared dinner on an old stove and her brother Devin recounted their own battles with a wry smile, Charlotte would sit with a cup of iced tea and reflect on the delicate interplay between pain and strength, injustice and redemption. It was a reminder that while the world could be cruel, it was also capable of healing and transformation if only enough voices rose in unison to demand it. And so, as the seasons shifted and the echoes of that tumultuous day faded into memory, Jefferson High and its surrounding community slowly began to change. The incident had ignited a spark that grew into a sustained movement of protest against bullying and discrimination. Charlotte's quiet act of self-defense had become the catalyst for deep, systemic change, inspiring a generation to stand up for what was right, no matter how quietly they might begin. For every whispered remark or dismissive glance aimed at a student of color, there was now a determined rebuttal, a reminder that every act of injustice would be met with a response that was as measured as it was unyielding. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, the transformation was both visible and profound. New initiatives focused on diversity and inclusion were implemented. Teachers underwent training to better understand the nuances of racial bias, and students were encouraged to speak openly about their experiences. Even in the realms of social media and local news, where the narrative of the day had once painted Charlotte as a mere reaction to a bully, it evolved into something much more significant. A story of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of standing up for oneself. Even as Bryce Callahan retreated into the shadows of his own contrition, whispers of his former dominance persisted, serving as a cautionary tale of how cruelty, when left unchecked, ultimately finds its own downfall. Yet for Charlotte, the most lasting change was the inner strength that had been forged in that extraordinary moment of defiance. Each day, as she navigated the challenges of a school environment that was still learning to confront its own prejudices, she carried with her the quiet knowledge that she had taken a stand not just for herself, but for every student who had ever been overlooked, belittled, or silenced. And as the world outside Jefferson High continued its slow, steady rotation, that stand of dignity and courage resonated far beyond the confines of a single cafeteria incident. It sparked a conversation about justice that could no longer be ignored. Looking back on that day, many in the community would later remark that it was as if time had stood still for those precious 10 seconds. In that brief interlude, the quiet power of an individual had upended a system built on exclusion and cruelty. For the older generation, women who had lived through eras of sweeping social change and had seen firsthand the transformative impact of courage and perseverance, it was a reminder that the fight for dignity is never truly lost, no matter the obstacles. Charlotte Hayes had become an emblem of that enduring struggle, a living testament to the fact that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one quiet voice can change the world. And change it did, In the aftermath of that defining moment, as Jefferson High slowly shed the weight of its past misdeeds and embraced a future tinged with promise, the legacy of Charlotte's calm yet fierce response continued to ripple outward. Her story was retold not as a celebration of violence, but as an affirmation of self-respect and the right to live free from the threat of hate. For every student who had once cowered in silence, for every parent who had despaired over the lack of protection for their child, Charlotte's transformation from a quiet observer to a bold defender offered hope, a beacon of light in a world that often seemed mired in injustice. Even as the years passed and the wounds of that day began to heal, the memory of the moment persisted. It was a symbol of the unyielding human spirit, a reminder that no matter how oppressive the forces arrayed against us might seem, there is always a way to reclaim one's dignity. For Charlotte, the path ahead was not defined solely by the battles she had fought, but by the legacy she was determined to build. A legacy of unity, resilience, and the uncompromising belief that every individual deserves to be treated with respect. Now, whenever the corridors of Jefferson High buzz with the sound of passing footsteps and hushed conversations, there is an unspoken understanding among the students and teachers alike, a shared knowledge that every act of injustice, no matter how small, will be met with the quiet, unwavering force of truth. And in that understanding there remains a promise that one day every quiet voice will have the power to echo as loudly as it must, and that the legacy of Charlotte Hayes will forever serve as a reminder that dignity is not given, it is taken. In the end, the story of that fateful day is not merely one of revenge or retribution, it is a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. It is the story of a young woman who, despite facing the relentless tide of cruelty, prejudice, and systemic injustice, found within herself the power to stand tall in a moment when the entire world seemed to be urging her to remain silent. And while Bryce Callahan's fall from grace was as dramatic as it was public, the true victory lay in the transformation of a community, a victory over a culture that had long prized dominance over decency. So as we reflect on the events that forever changed the course of one quiet student's life, let us remember that the greatest triumph is not in the act of striking back with fury, but in reclaiming one's self-worth with unyielding grace. Charlotte Hayes did not become a warrior through anger, she became one through years of quiet perseverance, every hardship igniting a spark that grew into the brilliant flame of self-respect. In her measured response, she not only defended herself against the cruelty of a bitter bully, but also lit a fire in the hearts of those who had long yearned for justice, a fire that continues to burn, fierce and unquenchable to this very day. And so, as the seasons change and the rhythms of daily life resume with renewed purpose, we can take solace in knowing that in every corner of our lives, there remains the possibility of transformation. In the quiet moments before dawn, in the soft murmur of a kind word, and in the brave act of standing up for what is right, there is hope. The hope that one day, every voice, no matter how quiet, will be heard, and that the legacy of one extraordinary act of courage will pave the way for a more compassionate, inclusive, and just tomorrow. In the annals of Jefferson High and in the hearts of all who witnessed that day, Charlotte's quiet act of defiance remains a shining example of the extraordinary power that lies within us all. It is a reminder that even in the face of hate and cruelty, it is possible to rise above and reclaim the dignity that is rightfully ours. For every mother who has ever worried about the safety of her child, for every elderly woman who has seen the harsh realities of a changing world, and for every person who has ever been made to feel small in a world obsessed with dominance, Charlotte Hayes' story stands as a triumphant ode to the resilience of the human spirit, a story that will be told for generations to come. And in telling that story, we celebrate not only the courage to stand up for oneself, but also the transformative power of empathy and unity. For it is in the collective embrace of justice and compassion that true change is born, and in that change, we find the promise of a future where every quiet voice has the strength to echo across time. When the final echoes of that turbulent day faded into the soft hum of the evening, Charlotte Hayes, that Friday afternoon had altered everything. Bryce's pride had been shattered more profoundly than his bruised body, and the unspoken message was clear. Real strength was never measured by size or volume or an inflated ego, but by the power of restraint and integrity. As Charlotte walked toward the back gate with her earbuds in and her mind already preparing for the bus ride home, she noticed Bryce waiting alone by the fence, a stark contrast to the swagger he once carried. For a moment, they simply regarded each other in silence, a silence that vibrated with the weight of past cruelties and the promise of redemption. Bryce spoke first in a halting voice, saying, "I'm not here to start anything," though his tone was laced with regret. He admitted, "I messed up. I let my pride get the better of me and thought pushing you would make me look tough. Instead, it only showed everyone what I truly am." Charlotte folded her arms and met his eyes steadily. She replied quietly yet firmly, "Thank you for saying that." Her voice conveyed a lifetime of resilience in the face of demeaning stereotypes and racial discrimination. In that moment, every slight she'd endured, from dismissive looks to venomous slurs, seemed to crystallize into a singular truth. True power comes from knowing your worth and standing your ground without stooping to cruelty. Bryce continued with a shaky confession that even the bitter comments on social media and the mocking laughter of his so-called friends had cut deeply, leaving him feeling isolated and exposed. "I saw the videos, the jokes. They stripped away everything I pretended to be. What hurt most was that you never lost control, while I turned into someone wild and out of control," he murmured. Charlotte's eyes, deep with a mixture of empathy and hard-earned wisdom, softened ever so slightly as she responded, "I've had to handle a lot in my life. I never allowed anyone to chip away at my dignity, not with words, not with actions." Her measured tone, reminiscent of a gentle yet unyielding force, encapsulated the lessons of self-respect and perseverance she had learned over years of silent battles. Later that night, as Charlotte sat at the kitchen table with her mother Camille while they folded laundry, the simple domesticity of the moment brought home an even deeper significance. Camille asked softly, "You okay?" And Charlotte replied with a serene smile, "Yeah, I am." She explained that the real fight was never about violence, but about the value of knowing one's worth and refusing to let anyone, no matter how loudly they boasted or how many joined in their mockery, diminish that value. Bryce's apology and the ensuing quiet resolution were not just personal reckonings. They signaled the beginning of change at Jefferson High. Real accountability was finally seeping into a community that had long rewarded bullies and ignored the silent cries of the oppressed. In that transformative moment, Charlotte Hayes proved that true power is measured by the grace with which one rises above cruelty to reclaim one's dignity and inspire hope for a more just future.